Hello, amazing algebra half students. This is Mrs. A, and I love math. And today we are going to be talking about overall average in lesson 42. And the overall average, remember, an average is when we add up all of the items and we divide by the number of items that we have. But sometimes when you're looking for overall average, it can be a little tricky. So the overall average is not the average of the averages. So let's look at a problem closely. This is your example. It says the average of the first two numbers was 6, and the average of the next 8 numbers was 20. What was the overall average? Okay, so we had 2 numbers, and their average was 6. And we had 8 more numbers, and their average was 20. So altogether, we had 10 numbers. And we had 2 numbers whose average was 6. So we multiply. We don't know what those numbers were, but we know that 6 plus 6 has an average of 6. So we just assume that each number can be counted as 6. Now we know the numbers probably are not 6 and 6, but we can count them as 6 and 6 because their average is still going to be 6. Okay, so 6 times 2 is 12. So we're just going to say that's a 12 count because 2 numbers have an average of 6. So we will count them as 6 and 6 and get 12. And then we have 8 numbers that have an average of 20. And we don't know what those numbers are, but we know that we can count them as 8 20s because 8 20s has the same average, 20, of 8 numbers. So we say 20 times 8, which is 160. So we add the 12 and the 160 together, and we get 172. And we have 172 as our count, and we have 10 numbers. So we divide 172 by 10, and we say each number, the overall average is 17.2 because I had a total count of 172 divided by 10. So my overall average is 17.2. Isn't that easy? Okay, so now look at your practice problem. We have an average of the first 4 items is 40. Okay, so we're going to take those 4 items. We don't know what they are, but we're going to count them each as 40. So 4 times 40 is 160. And then we have the average of the next 6 items was 80. We don't know what those items are, but we can count them as 80 6 times. So we're going to count them as 80, 80, 80, 80, 80, 80. And 80 times 6 is 480. So now we're going to take the 160 and the 480, and we're going to add them together to get 640, and that's for all 10 items. And since 640 divided by 10 is 64, the overall average is 64. So when we have 2 different averages given to us, we're going to take the numbers that have that average, and we're going to multiply that number of items by the average and tally up those points for both averages. And then we're going to divide by the total number of points, total number of items, and we will have our overall average. And that is all there is to it. And that is the end of lesson 42. And you guys have a fun time doing your homework. And this is Mrs. A. And may God bless your day. And back again, I decided to add one more example that I made up myself just because there were only 2 problems in that lesson. It was very short. But I made you one with 3 different types of items. So it's a little bit harder, but it's the same principle. We have 2 items that average 50. So we're going to count those 2 items as 50 plus 50. Okay, so we have 100 points from those 2 items. And then we have 3 items that average 60. So we're going to think of those as 60 plus 60 plus 60, which is 180 points. And then we have 5 items that average 20 each. So we can think of that as 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20, and that is 100 items. Okay, so we have 100 items plus 100 count, and 180 as the second count, and a 100 as the third count. So that's going to be 380 is the total count. And we had 2 plus 3 plus 5, or 10 items. So I'm going to divide the 380 by 10. The only reason I made it 10 is it's so easy to divide by 10. It could have been 9 or it could have been 11, but I just made it 10 because I was making up the problem and I wanted it to be easy. So now we're going to divide 10 into 380, and the overall average is 38 per item. And you can see that we started out with an average of 50 and an average of 60 and an average of 20, and 38 is in the middle somewhere. Okay, it is higher than your lowest item and it is lower than your highest item. So 38 sounds pretty reasonable to me. And now we really are done with lesson 42. And this is Mrs. A, and may God bless your day.